those who and those that are our loved ones, and kind of how to address any issues that may come up um, as we're going through this presentation. So we have it titled "Man's Best Friend: Navigating Pets and Dementia." And as Ellen said, my name is Kayla Baudoin. I'm a licensed clinical social worker here in Louisiana. And then let's see, move on to what the agenda today is. Okay, so first I'm going to do a real quick introduction, although Ellen started a great start for me. We'll go through what is the human-animal bond and what does that mean between your loved one and their pet, and even you and your pets, right? The other thing is, one of the things that was brought up is, it can be really challenging for those with dementia to maintain a pet in their home, um, throughout the disease process. So, kind of going over a few things there that maybe you as caregivers can help with as navigate that process together. One of those options would be rehoming, and another would be related to if you ended up deciding to euthanize the pet, some sort of memorialization so that your loved one can grieve over the loss of the pet. And even if you're rehoming, you may see that as well. And then, of course, there's a question and answer section for anybody who wants to throw anything out from there. So, just the very briefest bit about me. So, I am from Louisiana, born and raised, mostly the outskirts of Baton Rouge. I got a psychology degree and then my social work degree, both from LSU. Actually, while I was in my social work uh, master's program, I got a certificate in gerontology, so older adults is kind of a passion of mine. So it was really great that I'm able to work with this organization to kind of, merge some things because I don't always get to do this. And one of the things I did during my social work master's program was we had to do internships. And one of those I ended up doing here at the LSU Vet School, and it was related to grief and loss, um, end of life decisions for pets, and things of that nature, as well as working with students and faculty staff related to anything personal that they have going on. So before we really dive in, I do want to say that everything that we cover here, I just want to do the caveat of you guys are doing amazing things and the best that you can as you're going through this, right? Being a caregiver for someone who has Alzheimer's, dementia, things of that nature, it's difficult. So I really hope that you guys give yourselves a little pat on the back for one, taking the initiative to look into something like this so that you can help them maintain that bond that your loved one has with their pets. So as we're thinking about that sort of thing, keep in mind, your role is not just a caregiver, right? Like, for example, I'm a daughter, I'm a granddaughter of a person that has dementia. I'm a sister, I'm a wife, mother to my own fur babies, an educator, a social worker, a friend, an ally, an advocate. These are all different roles that I, as one person, have, and so do you, right? So, caregiving is not your full everything that makes up you, right? So there are all these other different roles and dimensions to that. And I just really want to emphasize how great a job that you guys are doing. And I know how difficult that can be. So pat yourselves on the back for that one. So the next part is, of course, my fur babies, as I mentioned. So we have Ellie, Coda, Shell, Moo Moo, and Baby Boy. Yes, I have had many animals, and this is the smallest amount that I've ever had. It's a house full, but I love each and every one of them, and they all have their own unique personalities. As I'm sure many of you have learned, either with your own pets or even with your loved one's pet, right? Some of them are shy, some of them are outgoing. They all have a little bit of something that's different. And then down at the bottom is my husband and I when we went to Disneyland in California. So he is also, another fur baby that I take care of. I'm sure there are many in the audience who can also agree with that statement as well, with a significant other. So one thing I want to start out with is the human-animal bond. So this is a major crux of why it is so important to maintain, if possible, a pet within the home, especially if they've had that pet for any extended amount of time. There are things that perhaps they have undergone with their pet that maybe you don't even know about. So kind of keep that in mind. One thing I want to start out with is, as Ellen mentioned, if you guys wouldn't mind putting in the chat, what do you think a companion animal is? And I'll give you guys a second for that one.
Let's see, Kayla. I'm going to keep an eye out on the chat for
Yeah,
you.
no worries.
Someone
Okay.
said, I would think any animal that gives the person comfort and makes, and I think it means, and makes them not feel alone. An animal for comfort, a pet that provides comfort and support, any animal that brings joy and makes you feel loved, any animal that provides emotional or physical support. Someone said a friend. Someone said they provide company, comfort, and support as well. And
That's
also some
wonderful.
compliments for your pets in the chat.
Thank you all. Yes, I love them dearly. And if you ever want to put your own pets in the chat, I would love looking at those too. So yes, you guys hit it right on the mark, right? So a companion animal is going to be any animal that provides comfort to your loved one, right? So here I have any creature that brings joy and becomes a part of the social fabric of a family. So one thing I want to emphasize here is, and I didn't learn this until I got into this role, was any species of animal can be a companion animal. A lot of times we think of that as cats or dogs, but actually it extends to any animal that your loved one may own. If they feel they have a bond for it, and not that it just serves a purpose, such as like food animals like cattle or pigs that are set out to be food or provide eggs or anything of that nature, right? But it can be any species. And I say that because it wasn't something I learned until I spoke with a woman who had lost her bird, and that bird had been with her for 30 years. Um, and that is a huge bond and something that's really important and needs to be cherished. So I ask you to open your mind a little bit for those of you who may notice that your loved one has something that's not a cat or a dog, because it can even extend to that. So the human animal bond, the definitions that I found were a mutually beneficial and dynamic relationship between people and animals that is influenced by behaviors considered essential to the health and well-being of both, right? So your animal provides things for you, and you provide things for your animal. So it's mutually beneficial there. Not only that, but it's also beneficial to the mental, physical, and social health of people and animals. Okay. So it covers all the different things, and that's what I'm going to go through just here with these benefits. So one thing that it does is it decreases stress, right? So when you have a pet in the home, how many of you have just like sat down, watched some TV, and all you're doing is like petting on your pet, right? Like petting your dog, petting your cat, whatever it may be. That situation there actually decreases blood pressure, which helps to decrease your stress. It also reduces loneliness, right? So there are times when maybe our loved ones, you may see them go through things like depression, right? They may be the only ones left at that point. I kind of see that a lot where, you know, the comment about, well, there's not many more that are gonna be around. Those kind of things come up a lot because they're going to funerals more. They're saying goodbye more. So having not only you guys as caretakers, but also something else that is in their home that provides some sort of support to them. And I say that because I'm sure you guys have noticed, if you have your own pet, these pets are like best friends, right? They're the person you can tell secrets to, and they'll never tell anyone. They give you unconditional love, um, and really that kind of support, right? So while you can't potentially be with them 24/7, a pet might be able to provide that. The other thing is, so hopefully the pictures of some of my animals gave this to you guys, but sometimes just interacting with animals is a mood booster, right? It just kind of like excites us in some way, even if we're literally just standing there petting one, or viewing an image of one. It sometimes brings that sense of comfort. The other side of it is physically, it provides for more physical activity. Of course, for many things, as far as animals go, you do have to perform some sort of physical activity in order to make sure that their well being is taken care of. We'll go with the standard dog situation, which is that, walking the dog, moving around the house with the dog, feeding the dog, right? There is physical activity that is involved with that. And I understand that people may be at different points, right? Some people may have decreased mobility, but they still have the ability to do certain things, petting potentially, things of that nature. And though it might seem small, these little activities that are part of a routine in the day, it does get them moving and kind of thinking about the next thing that they need to do for their babies. So this is one of the things that I was asked to speak on for this presentation. So I can imagine that you guys as caregivers, as much as possible, you want to find out if there's anything that you can do at home or within the caregiver's home to be able to potentially have that pet stay there longer than, maybe you are thinking at now, right? So one of those things is going to be crate training. So there is the potential that there are pets that people train. It's not too hard, but basically it's this wire cage, and people would set them like maybe by a bed, so that during the night you can train the animal to go into the crate. So that way, that is where they sleep and stay. So they have decreased accidents during the night, so that you, as the caregiver or your loved one, doesn't necessarily have to worry about them making a mess on the floor, and things like that, right? Or getting into anything during the middle of the night. It is something that's fairly easy to do for many pets that are dogs, at least, because you can reward them with treats for getting into their kennel. And one thing that you can do is actually leave the kennel out and open throughout the day. So that way they get more comfortable realizing, like, oh, it's just another piece of furniture. And yes, I have to sleep here at night, right? So there are some things that you can work on with them in that relation. I would not recommend creating pretty much anything else, right? Cats are pretty independent, and I don't think that they would do very well when you put them in a crate. They kind of like roam themselves and are pretty quiet for the most part, right? The other thing that you can start setting up is what's known as queuing. So your loved one, or even yourself, whoever's taking care of the pets, as well as the person that's has dementia or Alzheimer's. So queuing is something where you do things like set phone alarms. A lot of us in the digital age, there's a quick way to put an alarm in your phone. Um, there's also calendar reminders that you can set for yourself or your loved one. Or if you want to go old school, as we call it, and do Post-it notes, that works as well, right? So maybe it's even putting Post-it notes over the house. Maybe it's putting them by their bedside table, whatever it is that can help them remember, oh yeah, it's 4 o'clock, I need to feed Fluffy. And it's not needed every day, right? Like some days are their good days. And then there are some days where it's like, okay, they may need a reminder today. And of course, depending on how far you want to go, you can also set that alarm so that you call them to remind them, hey, don't forget to feed Fluffy now. Now that's going a little bit further, and it may be one of those things that you do the further into the progression of the Alzheimer's disease that they become. But it's really up to you, right? You can set whatever schedule that you want with them so that it's easier for them to remember the things they need to do. They need to walk them. For cats, they need to clean the litter box. Again, they need to feed them and water them. These other things that they have to do, setting these reminders are really helpful. Another thing is you can keep your pet items in one spot and labeled, right? Try not to move the items from one spot in the den to maybe the bedroom, right? Because it gets trained in people's brains that, oh yeah, the toys are here, or the food is here, or whatever it is, and you kind of always know, okay, this is where I go for that. If you start moving things around, it kind of can increase confusion, and that's kind of what we're trying to reduce, right? Also, in case you did not know, there are different food companies that will ship food and medications to you or your loved one's house. Okay. One of those examples I have listed is Chewy. I know that they can mail to you dry food or wet food for at least cats and dogs. Same for some medications, such as like flea and tick control, or maybe some supplements. Maybe the pet is also older and they need supplements for their joints. These kinds of things can be found at Chewy. Some of them do require a veterinarian's script, basically, so that it's like filling a script for a human, right? You would do the same thing, only you would scan that script and place it on Chewy so that Chewy knows that you have a doctor or veterinarian who's keeping up with any special medications or any special foods that are necessary. They also have automatic water and food refill bowls that are out there. So if you don't want to set up phone alarms, calendar reminders, make those calls, put post-it notes out and just, kind of take a step back, you can also do automatic food and water refill bowls. I would still recommend, if you're going into the house throughout the day, I would still recommend kind of walking by the area where you're placing these so that you get eyes on, is the water bowl and the food bowl still working appropriately? And I only say that because if you have not dealt with some animals, they are very smart. Um, and some have figured out how to, let's say, cheat the system, right? So some of the automatic food refillers, if you just hit it with just enough force, you can actually make it spit out more food. So you want to keep that in mind. And sometimes, accidents happen, people get really excited, and perhaps the water bowl tips over and all the water goes everywhere, right? These kind of little things can happen on a daily basis. It's not the end of the world. It's just one of those things I want you to kind of be aware of, to just kind of check on, right? Or if you can't do it that day, ask your loved one, hey, can you walk by the food bowl or water bowl and just make sure everything's good? And that way, while you're on the phone with them, they can give you an update. Another thing to keep in mind for those of you who have not worked with animals very often, there are plants that are toxic to different animals. So if your loved one is keeping plants in their house because that makes them happy and brings them joy, that's totally fine. Just make sure that you do a little bit. I mean, even a Google search can tell you, is this plant poisonous to cats or dogs or whatever it may be, right? That's just to double check yourself, because you really don't want to have an animal chewing on a plant leaf and then you realize, oh no, it's toxic, and the animal starts getting sick because of that. So that's a really quick and easy way to avoid that kind of a situation. Perhaps even all the changes is moving the plant outside, or perhaps setting it on a place that the animal can't reach. So social support help. So I know you guys are caregivers, and that's lovely, but as we talked about earlier, you do have other roles in your life, right? You are not just a caregiver, you're a person, you have your own things that you need to take care of for you. So having the social support system that you have to provide help related to these goals, is just a nice breather, right? So maybe you have um, a child, or maybe you even pay to have a walker come in, once a day, twice a day, to walk the animal for you and your loved one, so that it takes the responsibility off of you and puts it on someone else to help share that support, and the help that's needed for the pet as well. It's just kind of another thing that kind of takes a little bit of the pressure off of you, right? So written care instructions. So what I say for this is, for your animals, if possible, try to make sure that you are given written care instructions. Um, I say that because how many times have you gone to the doctor and you get, I don't know, let's even go with two prescription medications. They tell you all the things, right? You need to give it twice a day with food, and it needs to be given exactly at 7. Or you get another medication, it's like, it's every other day, it's as needed. You don't need it with food. Even those kind of things, in addition to everything else you have to keep in your mind, you don't need that extra burden of having that information just only in your mind. So I would really request from the veterinarian that you are bringing the animal to provide written instructions on any medications, any food things that need to change, even any behavioral things that they recommend, right? Just having them write it out for you so that it's not just all up in your head, and then what happens if it gets a little jumbled, right? Because we're at times really stressed. And those kind of things are some of the first ones that can give in those situations. And then, as I already kind of alluded to, uh, having a veterinarian, their contact information on hand, both at your caregiver's home, or something that you also keep with you as well, right? So if an emergency situation comes up, one thing I want you to talk with the veterinarian about is, if your loved one can no longer make the decisions for the pet and you're really the one making any financial decisions or you know, decisions related to their health, you may want to become the owner of record for that animal. And that's just so that you're the one that's able to make the decision in the veterinarian's eyes, right? And your loved one may no longer have that ability. So just kind of keep that background going. So maybe even now you ask your loved one, what veterinarian does your pet go and see at the moment? And maybe that's when you start to establish a relationship with them. Maybe just call them up, let the receptionist or front desk person know, hey, this is going to be a change. Is there anything I need to know history wise about the pet that I need to look out for? The other thing to look into is there are living will stipulations. So sometimes it's not as often, but we do have people now who are putting their pets into their wills, right? So there may be a stipulation in there about their pet. You just may want to be aware that that exists. Okay, so these are all, really great things to try, right? It is it is a really good thing to try all of these efforts to try to maintain the pet in the home as long as possible. However, obviously there are times that come where it's no longer something that you can do and take care of, nor can your loved one take care of the animal anymore. So I say rehoming is an option up here. For that, ideally, I would recommend, if possible, a family member or friend, someone you know, right, that will be a good home for the animal. That is not always the case, and you cannot always do that. Please do not take your loved one's pet into your home and add it as an additional thing that you need to take care of if you are not able to do that. Um, it's just not good for you or the pet, right? Having that additional caregiving responsibility. The other thing to consider is there are some rescues out there where perhaps the pet was actually adopted from. Those groups sometimes take their pets back into their system if for something like this happens, right? And someone is no longer able to take care of the pet. Some of the groups will actually take the pet back and then put it through their adoption system again and find them a new home. I know Cat Haven used to be one of those. I don't know anymore which ones are, but it's something to definitely ask, especially if your loved one kept the paperwork, right? Where they adopted from. I mean, that's a lovely resource to have if they kept that. The other thing to consider is there may be a rescue out there that is willing to take in the pet. It doesn't hurt to try and ask. So that way you avoid having to do something like, finding a shelter or anything like that. And I say that because there's some shelters that are kill shelters. And I want you to be aware of that. It doesn't mean they all are. It doesn't mean that a pet that you do bring to one will, of course, be euthanized or anything. I just want you to be aware that there are some rescues that their sole purpose is to take them in again, find a new home, and that's all that they do. The other thing that's kind of a newer service that I learned about is the Hospice of Baton Rouge. So if your loved one is at that point, right, and they are working with Hospice of Baton Rouge, they actually have a pet peace of mind program. And what they do is if your loved one passes or even before that point, they can foster the animal and find them a new home for you. I believe you have to be through that system, the Hospice of Baton Rouge, for them to actually work with you for this. But it is something to keep in mind whenever it may get closer to that point. It's just another resource that's out there. So these are kind of the ideal options, but that doesn't mean that bringing them to a shelter is a poor option as well. Nor does it mean that if it is something that you need to do, to euthanize the animal, right? And of course, as someone who loves animals, I'd love for that to be the last option, but I get that sometimes it's not. And we have to do things that are hard, and we have to do them for ourselves and our loved ones. It's not a fun conversation to have, but I know that is an option, and I want you to know that it's an option as well. And it's not something that you should feel guilty about as something if you need to do that for you and your family, because maybe the other things are not an option for you. So keep that in mind. What can you do? So when you're talking about removing an animal from a home, what I want you to consider is empathizing with the person that is going to be losing the animal, right? And by losing, I mean, even if you're rehoming the animal, it's still a loss, right? That human animal bond that they created, there will still be grief involved with that. One thing that's really great is ask their preference. So if you have two options that are, both good options, do they have a preference on which one they would prefer their pet go to, right? So maybe they say, oh, Uncle Joe is happy to take the pet in, but also we found out the adoption place that you got them from is willing to take him or her back. Which one would you prefer? Giving them that power back to make that decision is just something that's empowering to them. And it gives it, it kind of releases some of that burden of you making the decision in a way. So you know that your loved one endorses whatever decision you do make. And then again, there is the potential that something within their will could be stipulated on what they prefer for the animal. I know they have animal clauses now, so it could be that if a loved one takes in your animal, they get X amount per month to take care of the animal. That's kind of what I'm talking about. Other thing to do is actively listen to them, right? This is a difficult time. Whether it's rehoming, euthanizing, whatever the option is, it's a difficult time. So try to sit there and listen actively, which means you're sitting there talking to them and hearing their feelings, and you are not waiting to turn around and give them a response, right? That can be really hard. And actually, if you do that in everyday life, it's a really hard skill to master. But once you get in the habit of it, it's really easy to do. And it makes things like people feel heard, right? Because you are talking to them, listening to their feelings, and you're not thinking in your mind while they're talking, okay, what do I need to say next? It's just really nice to do that. As I already mentioned, be realistic in your decision. This is a hard decision to be made at times, but make sure, like I said, you don't take on something else that could be, a 10-year commitment. If it's not something that you can do, be realistic and see if there are any other options. And then to memorialize. So we'll actually go on to the next slide for this one. So it's really important to memorialize an animal. What I mean by this is perhaps even if the pet stays in the home for as long as possible, you may still be the one that has to make that decision on your loved one's behalf because maybe the pet's health has also decreased and maybe it's time for them. Um, or perhaps it may not have been time, but it was the best decision to make for your family and none of the other options were available. So a thing that you want to offer to your loved one, if not yourself, right? You may have even become attached to the animal as well, is to do something to memorialize the pet. So here are a bunch of different options that I kind of go over with clients of my own, talking through what are things that you can do that say, the bond that you had with that pet is amazing. And there are tons of ways to walk through remembering them. For some people, a photograph, right? Maybe you just place it on the mantle somewhere, and that photograph just reminds you of things that you had with them. For other people, they want a whole photo book, right? There's a lot of with digital world, you can take a lot of pictures, a lot of videos nowadays. So maybe instead of one photo, you have hundreds. So, some of that is taking time, maybe with your loved one, to go through some of those photos, recognizing that in the beginning, they may be sad, they may be angry, or any other emotion that goes with a grief process, which I'll go over next. Another thing is painting. Sometimes that creative outlet is just helpful for them. Now, whether they can paint their pet or maybe they just do even stick figures with the dog, right? Anything that just kind of helps them work through that process. Some people like to do save the collars from the pets and put that next to maybe ashes if they decide to cremate. Others options are needlepoint images, a pillow or blanket with the pet's image. Some who their animal liked going outside or perhaps was an outside animal, and that can even be a horse or a cow or whatever it may be. Having a stone in the garden to just represent, you know, this animal lived here and you had a really great bond with them. There's ornaments, and the one that kind of sticks out for me a lot of the times is journaling. Some people, I understand, they're not fans of journaling, totally get it. But for some people, it's really helpful to help process what happened. And I say that is you can prompt your loved one, tell me good stories that you remember about Fluffy. Write something like if you could say something to Fluffy, what would you have said, right? There are things of that nature that can really help someone process through what they're feeling because it gets it out of their head and they get to write it down and let it out, right? Rather than holding it in. And sometimes that's really helpful. If they don't want to talk to somebody, journaling is a really great way to do this because, again, it just gets it out of your head. You're not ruminating over anything. The other side of this is to remember that grief is a process. It comes in waves. And I really encourage you to think about this pet may have been with this person every day for even 5 years, right? Sometimes that is longer than they've been with a family member. Um, and so I would not rush them through a grief process. Obviously, with Alzheimer's and dementia, there may be some back and forth on the remembering side of that. And you kind of just have to go with it, right? Because they do have bad days and good days. Like it just happens. So these are some of the different things that they go through. So potentially denial, bargaining, anger, depression. At some point, they'll have some personal growth there and what the animal brought to their lives. And maybe that's something you help facilitate them thinking about. And then eventually there will be an acceptance and a resolution, which is kind of when the memorialization items come back into play, right? And even if you're rehoming, it's still a loss and you can still do any of these things to help them process that. So outside of that, right, it's like, okay, well, we've done all of these things, we tried things, we can no longer keep the pet in the house. Whatever option you go with, we just can't. So are there any other pet engagement options? Because you recognize that the benefits of being around a pet bring out good things in your loved one, right? So we already talked about even just boosting their mood, right? That can be so impactful, both for you and for them. So the things that I would consider in that realm, and it depends again on where they're at in the disease process, right? So for some people, the pet therapy is the best option. That is because the pet will come and visit perhaps a location, right? And your loved one can sit there and socialize with other people while petting the animal and kind of reconnecting with an animal in general. That's kind of the easiest option in general. The other thing you could potentially do is bring over either your pet or a friend's pet, or you could bring your loved one to their house. Just make sure that pet is friendly and socialized because you just don't want something to happen where the pet interacts with a person and the person doesn't recognize that maybe they made a really quick movement and that pet doesn't like that. Those kind of things you want to kind of avoid. There are volunteer opportunities with rescues. If your person maybe is having a good day, maybe it's earlier in the disease process, they can volunteer with a rescue. And some things to that nature, and yes, I get that you may have to go with them to volunteer for some of these things. So keep that in mind for yourselves. But some place like for Cat Haven, for example, I do know that even now they have a socialization volunteer. So the purpose of that person is to socialize the cats, and they literally sit there and play with the cats and kittens and socialize them. That is not a lot of heavy lifting for you or your loved one, and it's a way to get them out of the house to be volunteering and be next to animals. So if you have a day where you have time for that, another option. The other thing you could potentially do is have set up with a rescue organization where you and or your loved one do temporary fosters. Just another way to have an animal around, but also recognizing you can't keep this animal forever. It's just maybe over the weekend to get them out of the shelter. And it was a really fun experience for maybe the day or two, right? Okay, so I just spit a ton of information out at you guys. So does anybody have any questions at this point?
Let's see, I'll monitor the chat for you.
Thank you.
We did have someone just share a comment where they said
Okay.
that their personal dog is a registered care dog for them as well.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. Yeah, we have, there's something called pet partners where you can actually get any dogs that you think would fit this, all the stipulations that they have. You can register them as therapy dogs and maybe even use them as a way to facilitate the therapy is happening. It's not for everyone, but it is something that's out there. The company that we kind of always recommend is Pet Partners. And it's things like making sure their behavior is appropriate to be around any age group, making sure they can follow simple commands, sit, stay, and that sort of thing.
Awesome. Well, one thing I do want to say, Kayla, is I just want to just say how much I appreciate this information that you shared.
Yeah.
I mean, as a pet owner myself, I've learned so much today, and I think it gives me like warm, fuzzy, cozy feelings just to like see how regular grief is, no matter what the loss is, but also to know how many options there are out there just to be able to take care of your pet for a long time. But then also, if that does come down to losing that pet, that there's just so many things you can do, to continue to remember them and then be a part of your life. So I do see a bunch of good questions coming in, but I did want
Yeah.
to share that.
Thank you.
So the first question is what to do when the animal becomes a tripping hazard due to age or health related issues? It's a great question.
That is a great question. Thank you for throwing that out there. So off the top of my head, what I would say for that one is if it's a tripping hazard for your loved ones, and it kind of depends, right? Are they using the walker where it's like I can't think of the name, instead of just a
Like the
cane,
tennis
it's got,
balls.
yes, thank you. Thank you. So it's got the four tennis ball thing and moving in that direction. That's actually probably an easier way to help with tripping hazards because it creates that barrier automatically. The second thing I would think about is potentially putting up gates throughout the house. So one, it cues your loved one to know, okay, there's a gate here. Why is there a gate here? Maybe I shouldn't go through the gate. Or it can also help a really rowdy like sometimes puppies, they want to approach you, they want to jump up on you, right? And that instability there, it's worrisome. So creating that gate there so the animal stays behind it until they calm down may also help with that as well. Um, and as far as tripping goes, if you have a caregiver in the home, whether it's you or someone else, you can also keep in mind that when your loved one is getting up from somewhere, the animal who may be around them all the time has the ability to like maybe want to come up to them. So making yourself aware that that animal may become a hazard in the way for your loved one as they're getting up out of a chair, for example. So hopefully that helps.
Definitely. I think so. All right. Your next question is, if you were taking care of someone with memory loss, how do you suggest something like rehoming and then maybe not remembering that they wanted this or this is what needed to happen without maybe so much confusion?
Sure. And that's a difficult one, right? So to me, I would think of two different things off the top of my head would be one, if your person recognizes their signature, right, or their own handwriting, perhaps it's a good thing to have them write out, this is what I want to happen, and have them write it out in their own handwriting and sign it. A lot of the older adults in this generation still had to do things like write checks. They recognize their signature on papers and things like that. So that may be another way to cue that. And the other is, even with our smartphones these days, it can be really helpful to just record, right? So have them record a message back to themselves that says, hey, this is kind of what happened. This is the decision I made. Just a reminder, something like that. Those would be my top two to like think about. But it is a difficult conversation to potentially have or even keep having. And I recognize that.
Thank you for that. The next question says, I'm a dementia specialist and writing a book and just wondering if they can use some of your information and give you credit. What I'll do for this one is I'll introduce you guys after the presentation so y'all can connect even further after this.
I would love that. And yes, more than happy to lend any advice or help however I can with that. Love that.
That's awesome. All right, our next one is, have you heard of pets being used in physical or occupational therapy?
Mhm. Yes. So, that one is probably not on the well-known side of it, right? Because that animal is probably in that point being used as some sort of service dog. And a lot of times for service dogs in particular, they undergo a certain amount of training by specialized groups, and then you're paired with that service dog. So, if you're looking to get a pet into the home, looking at service dogs may be an option for that. But also really keep in mind that depending on where your loved one is in the process, one, it may be hard for them to recognize that it's a service dog, and that when it needs to be working and have its like vest on and that sort of thing. And two, that animal after maybe they pass then becomes your responsibility. And are you good with taking that on for yourself even? Just things to consider for that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, our next one, and I had a kind of a similar question to this myself, is should attachment to a doll be encouraged? And it says in parentheses that reminds them of a child. I had like another side to this question as well, is have you ever heard of any like a successes with using those pets that they sell, people specifically with dementia, that maybe look like a real cat or look like a real dog? Do you typically recommend anything like that as well?
So, okay, so the doll question, so I'll go with the doll question first for that one. You said doll, like DOLL?
Yeah, and if
Okay.
that's something you'd rather me answer, I can too. I can help with that if you need
Yeah,
some tips, let me
actually,
know.
Ellen, you may know more about the doll side of it, and then I'll answer the stuffed animal type side of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So for the doll, it totally depends on each person. Some people really, really flourish with the comfort of a doll that does remind them of caregiving for a child. But some people may not be as comfortable with a doll. So I always recommend to families, if that's something you're interested in, it's always worth a shot. And if that person doesn't take to it or maybe feels uncomfortable, then just take it away or try to do something else. But anything is worth a try to see if maybe it could bring them just any type of additional comfort. So that's my input just on the doll thing.
Sure, and I'll actually go off of that as well. So some of the things for the memorialization, yes, you can totally attempt to do a stuffed animal, right? Because even with a stuffed animal, you can still get that physical petting sensation, right? Where they're feeling something soft that they can be petting. And I'm gonna parrot what Ellen said on that is some people it works really well for. Some they already recognize this is a stuffed animal. It wasn't my baby. Like no. And I think you really have to take that with, well, you tried. Maybe it didn't work for your loved one, but at least you gave it a shot. And on that same respect, sometimes stuffed animals can actually just be another comfort for them, right? Because it's something they can hold on to, they can squeeze, they can still share secrets too, it's things like that. So it may even not necessarily that it looks like the animal that they lost, but even just as another comfort tool to have in their household.
Absolutely. Another question for you, so many good questions. What are your thoughts on a pet moving into a care facility with their loved one?
So I think that is a really personalized decision. I would look into the stipulations that the care facility puts on the pet and your loved one, right? What would your loved one be responsible for? What would the facility provide for the pet as well, right? So, let's say it's a dog, for example. Do they have locations outside of the care facility where you can walk the dog, where you have like a poop pickup station, and these kind of things? Is it something that your loved one needs to be aware of that they need to be able to do? Also, there are animals that make noise, like sometimes dogs bark, sometimes cats meow pretty loud. These kind of things, or even birds, right? Sometimes birds sing, they talk out loud. All of these things, I would ask the care facility what has been their experience, especially if they allow for it. And they can actually probably give you some ideas on what to consider overall before allowing your loved one to know that that's an option, right? If they move into the facility.
I think that's great input. That's all the questions for now in the chat, but I'll let you know. Oh, we just got another one. All right. Do you know of any interactive pet therapy in Baton Rouge?
Okay, so my experience is a little limited. I here at the vet school, we have a group that's called Tiger Hats. And what we do is actually they go out to different places in the community and they all have therapy dogs that they'll bring somewhere and people can interact with them in that way. For example, here with students during finals week, we have them visit the library so that they can have a little bit of love. I also know they visit the Our Lady of the Lake Children's Hospital unit pretty regularly. So that is also something. If it's an actual care facility, you want to make sure you ask the facility what their policies are on even bringing in therapy dogs, just to cover your bases and that sort of thing before you even reach out to the group. If that's something that you want to have come to your specific community location, right? They don't generally go to people's houses or anything like that. It's more like a group gathering and they have this, or even Alzheimer's services if they decide that's something they're able to do, maybe even having them come out there. So Tiger Hats is what that group is called. And if you want more information on that, feel free to email me. This is my info out there, by the way. So this is me. Feel free to email me. I'm happy to forward you on to the people in charge of that. And just for an FYI, the Best Friend Gone project down here is a counseling service that I offer for Louisiana residents, generally ones that have seen our hospital here at the vet school. And it's offering grief counseling or even anticipated grief counseling and that sort of thing. So any questions you have, happy to work with you about that as well.
That was actually going to be my next question. I wanted to know more about the Best Friend Gone project myself. So thank you for sharing that.
To parallel, I forgot one thing on that one. It is a free service, but it is a limited session service because of capacity, right? So it's only maxed like 5 sessions. And generally, if it needs more than that, we would recommend a community reference because at that point, they may need something more than this.
Okay, that's great to know. Thank you so much, Kayla. And I'll share your contact information in the follow-up email as well.
Okay,
So that in case anybody has additional questions, they can reach you. And I'm going to save the chat for you too, because there's a lot of really good feedback for you in the chat.
awesome.
But I just wanted to thank you again for taking the time and doing all this, sharing all this awesome information with us today. I know this has been really, really impactful to so many families. So thank you so, so much.
Of course. Thank you guys for having me, Ellen and Alzheimer's Services. It's great to pair with you guys. And this is, human animal bond. It's such a passion of mine that I'm glad I got to share some of this with you guys out there. And again, I really want to emphasize how wonderful you guys are as a community that are taking care of your loved ones that are going through this. It's difficult, and I commend you for that. So thank you so much. Yes, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to answer any questions or direct you to places that I can. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Kayla, and thank you to everyone who joined in. If you have any questions, reach out to either of us.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.